The reliquary shook again. I heard the lead scrape against stone, a dry rasp, though no one touched it. I kept my hands folded, but the air pressed heavy on my chest. The chamber beneath St. Peter's was still, dust layered thick, candle flames frozen as if afraid to move. And then came the sound. A single bell toll, distant yet sharp, cut through the scavi like a knife. It didn't echo, it just hung there, one note suspended in the air. I froze, my breath snagged. I'd been told the auxiliary bell never rang unless called by human hand. But no hand moved. The rope lay slack, unmoving. The sound shouldn't have existed. The reliquary jolted, a metallic thud, then another, softer, like something inside pushed back. I stared at the seam where the lead was soldered shut. The dust shook loose from the lid, sprinkling down like ash. I whispered nothing. My lips stayed sealed. I wanted to pray, but the words stuck, coiled in my throat. The chamber was too narrow, the walls too close. Even the dead stones seemed to lean in, listening. From the corner, a voice. Not loud, not even strong. Just a thread of air sliding across my ear. Non vocare! Don't call the name. I spun, but the light gave me only walls and bone and plaster. No figure, no mouth, only the reliquary shifting in the gloom. The candle nearest the box guttered, bending low as if dragged down by a breath. A thin trail of wax stretched and broke. My ears rang. I thought it was the silence afterward, but no. The bell still trembled in the distance. One note, forever tolling, never fading. I wanted to leave. My shoes scraped against stone, the sound too loud, too real, betraying me. The reliquary answered with another dull knock. It was slower this time, deliberate, like a heartbeat that didn't belong in this world. The chamber smelled of damp limestone, iron, and something sharp, sulphurous, like struck matches left too long. It coated my tongue, bitter and metallic. I clenched my hands tighter, my knuckles ached, and still I couldn't move. The reliquary pulsed faintly under the light, not glowing, no, but shifting shade by shade, darker than the dark around it. I thought of earth unsettled, of graves refusing to stay shut. Another whisper, not words this time, just breath sliding along the curve of my skull, cold, intimate. My knees buckled. I bit down on my tongue to keep from answering, because if I spoke, I feared it would answer back. I served in a small parish on Maple Street, Ashland County, Ohio. It wasn't grand, not like the cathedrals in Rome, but it was steady. The people trusted me, and I trusted them. I'd walked the same worn steps from rectory to church every morning for more than 15 years. The bells rang at 6, the first Mass at 7, the same faces filling the pews. Some called me patient, others called me stubborn. I just called it routine. It was faith shaped into rhythm. The church itself stood plain, brick walls faded with years of winter frost. The windows were narrow, letting in just enough light to cast pale stripes across the pews. Mrs. Clara Hayes sat in the same place every morning, 2 rows back on the left. She clasped her rosary so tight her knuckles whitened, whispering prayers I could never quite hear. Children fidgeted during homilies. Farmers wiped dirt from their boots before stepping inside. This was my world, small, quiet, but honest. Bishop Alan Cooper checked in once a month. He was a practical man, sharp-eyed, but not unkind. "They speak well of you, Andrew," he had said one spring morning as we stood outside after Mass. "You hold the flock together." I'd smiled, uncomfortable with the compliment. My work was simple. Preach, teach, console, bury, marry, repeat. I never asked for more. My voice wasn't loud, my sermons weren't poetic, but they listened, and I thought that was enough. The knock came on a Thursday afternoon. I opened the rectory door and found Father Marco De Luca standing there, fresh from Rome, his cassock sharp, his eyes sharper. He introduced himself quickly, formally, his Italian accent only a faint curve. He carried a sealed envelope. Inside was a letter stamped with the crest of the Vatican. An invitation. He explained. A gathering, a week of liturgy, teaching, shared prayer at the Vatican itself. Your presence would honor us, he said. I didn't hesitate. To refuse such a request would have felt like refusing God himself. I agreed. The night before I left, I walked through the church alone. I touched the worn wooden pews, the chipped edge of the baptismal font, the iron cross that hung crooked near the sacristy door. These were the anchors of my life. I whispered a blessing over the empty space, imagining the faces that would gather again on Sunday without me. The flight out of O'Hare felt heavier than usual. I'd flown before, but this was different. The terminal buzzed with families, business travelers, the restless shuffle of strangers. I sat near the gate, collar visible, and more than one passerby nodded at me with polite respect. When the plane lifted, I pressed my forehead to the window and watched the grid of streets dissolve into clouds. Leaving behind Maple Street, the parish, the faces of people who trusted me, it felt final in ways I couldn't name. I told myself I'd be back in 10 days. That's what I believed. Hours later, we descended over Rome. The city stretched gold under the setting sun, domes and spires piercing the skyline. My chest tightened with awe. This was the heart of my faith, the place I'd only read about, prayed toward. Father Marco guided me through the airport with brisk efficiency. His words were polite but clipped, as if every minute mattered. We rode in silence into the Vatican walls. Rome unfolded like a painting, the sun over the Tiber, the dome of St. Peter's bright against the sky, the sweep of cobblestones echoing under every step. Father Marco led me through the Vatican gardens first, pointing out places where saints had prayed, where popes had walked. The air smelled of trimmed cypress and incense drifting from unseen chapels. Marble fountains murmured in the shadows, doves circling overhead. I tried to steady myself, to see it as pilgrimage, nothing more. The private chapel where we prayed that evening was silent stone, lit only by hanging lamps. Monsignor Paolo Vitali waited inside. His presence was measured, calm, his voice gentle but firm. He welcomed me as if I belonged. It disarmed me. Rome has waited for you, he said quietly, as though it were fact rather than kindness. I bowed my head, unsure how to respond. Later, I was led to the Apostolic Archive, deep rooms lined with parchment and catalogued relics. The corridors smelled of paper and candle soot. Archivist Leone appeared from between shelves carrying a lantern. His beard was gray, his eyes unreadable. He laid out a dossier on a wooden table. Inside, sketches of a reliquary bound in lead, photographs of dig sites near the Sea of Galilee. He explained, his voice low. The object had been discovered near the ancient ruins tied to the Gerasenes, the very region where Scripture speaks of legion. The modern site was Kais, also known as Gadara. Archaeologists uncovered a sealed box during excavation, soil and fragments within dated to the first centuries. The inscriptions on a thin lead plate inside suggested binding, a formula older than the church itself. There were threats of looting, the region unstable. Rome had agreed to take custody for preservation and study. The earth keeps secrets, Leone said, but sometimes it refuses to hold them. I listened. I believed. I thought it was history safeguarded, nothing more. The photographs showed workers standing near half-collapsed stones, the reliquary half buried in dust. One note in the margin read, "Do not vocalize inscriptions. Dangerous." My eyes passed over the words without weight. I didn't yet understand. Monsignor Vitale joined us then. He spoke slowly, deliberately, and his words carried weight. "There are rules," he said, "not suggestions. rules you must keep if you wish to serve in this work. He gestured to Leon, who unrolled a small sheet of vellum. His voice carried as he read each line aloud. 1. When the bells toll once, do not speak the name. 2. Never touch the reliquary without 2 witnesses and the archive seal. 3. If the mirror lags, cover it. If it cracks, don't speak. 4. Read only the text given. Do not improvise any prayer not sanctioned in the archive. 5. No letters leave the chapel after dusk. I remember nodding. I thought of them as ceremony, safeguards meant to preserve discipline. I didn't think of them as danger. I didn't question why a mirror would matter or why the sound of a bell might bind the tongue. I just accepted. Father Marco smiled faintly. It's only formality, he assured me. Nothing you haven't done before. But I noticed the way Monsignor Vitale's eyes lingered when he looked at me, as if waiting for me to ask why. I stayed silent. Leone closed the vellum and snuffed his lantern. The reliquary remained sealed in the dossier photographs, its lead dull and heavy. I told myself it would stay that way. We left the archive late. The Vatican at night hummed differently than in the day, quieter, colder. The lanterns flickered in the gardens, shadows stretching like hands across the gravel paths. Marble statues stared down with blind eyes. I told myself it was beautiful. I told myself I was honored. I told myself I was safe. I was wrong. The sacristy smelled of wax and stone dust. The walls pressed close, the air stale with centuries of breath. Father Marco guided me through the narrow passage toward what he called the Black Chapel. He said it was a restricted place, not open to pilgrims. The key turned in his hand with a scrape, and the door opened onto a chamber without windows. Candles lined the walls, their flames too still, as if the air itself had been drained. We prayed in a circle. Monsignor Vitale's voice led, slow and deliberate. Archivist Leon held a thin sheaf of parchment and offered one to me. "Read here, Father," he said. His tone was calm, but his eyes did not blink. The first anomaly came with the bell. A small iron bell hung in the corner, a thing I hadn't noticed until it rang. Just once. A thin strike, as though a child had touched it. The sound cut through the prayer. My lips stopped moving. I remembered the first rule. When the bell tolls once, do not speak the name. But no one else faltered. Marco kept reading. Vitale's tone deepened. Leon gestured at me to continue. I forced myself back into the prayer. I told myself the bell was a draft, some trick of weight on the clapper. I told myself it meant nothing. But the air shifted. The silence after the note lingered too long, as though waiting. Later in the antechamber, I washed my hands at a stone basin. A mirror stood there, bronze-framed, polished but old. I bent forward and saw my own face, tired, pale in the candlelight. Then I stepped back. My reflection stayed half a breath longer before it moved. My stomach clenched. I reached forward, touched the glass. It was warm, too warm for stone-chilled air. A line of mist ran across the surface like sweat. Sister Rachel Moore passed by. "Are you well, Father?" Her voice was soft, concerned. I pulled my hand back too quickly. "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." She looked as though she wanted to say more, then lowered her head and walked on. The third came during the reading. Leone handed me another parchment the following night. The script was Latin, cleanly copied, the sort of text I'd read my whole life. But 3 lines down, I saw a phrase I didn't remember from the archive. The words bent differently, darker in tone. They named things that should never be named in prayer. I hesitated. Marco caught my pause. "Continue, Father," he said. His tone left no space for refusal. Vitale's eyes narrowed. The others leaned forward as if my voice mattered more than theirs. I read. The words felt heavier than they should, each syllable dragging like lead. My throat burned. Still, I told myself it was error, Mistranslation, some clerk's mistake. The archive copy was the official one. This must be a draft. I told myself not to doubt. Doubt was temptation. But the air told a different story. The candles trembled, though no wind moved. The iron bell quivered in the corner without sound, and in the mirror, behind my reflection, shadows leaned too near. That night I couldn't sleep. My cot in the guest quarters felt brittle, sheets stiff as shrouds. I repeated to myself, I'm tired, I'm seeing things, I'm human, but the words echoed without conviction. I knew what I'd seen. I knew what I'd heard. The next evening, the ritual repeated. Vitale's chant started slow. Marco's voice rose to meet it, and Leone's parchment slipped again into my hand. Another page, another line out of place. I scanned it quickly, searching for the note in the margins, do not vocalize. But it wasn't there. Instead, the text urged the opposite. Speak aloud. My lips moved unwillingly. My voice joined theirs, though my mind screamed to stop. Rachel found me after. Her eyes were wide, frightened. You saw it, didn't you? She whispered. I shook my head too quickly, the lie thin. You imagined it, I said. We're exhausted. She didn't answer. She only looked at the mirror in the corner and crossed herself. I walked away before she could speak again. My chest hurt. My hands trembled. I pressed them together until the bones ached. I told myself, fatigue, stress, nothing more. But the bell still rang in memory, and the mirror still burned warm against my palm. The third night, Marco pressed closer. His voice carried through the chamber. There is power in unity, he said. Do not falter, Father Cole. Rome expects strength. He placed his hand on my shoulder, firm, guiding me back into the circle. His grip lingered, more command than comfort. Vitale's chant shifted pitch. It wasn't just Latin anymore. It carried tones that pulled at the ear, syllables too smooth, too heavy. Leone followed with his lantern light, lifting it toward the reliquary at the far wall. The box seemed to pulse with shadow. I blinked hard. I told myself it was the flame bending, tricks of light. Yet the outline of the box blurred, as if breathing. I faltered again over the words. The parchment seemed different each night, ink darker, strokes sharper. I noticed a phrase I didn't remember from the archive, darker than the rest. My chest tightened, but I told myself it was nothing more than a copyist's slip. He said it with no change in tone, no trace of irony, as if repetition explained corruption. My throat ached from reading. My chest felt tight. Still, I complied. I told myself obedience was safety. The archive had rules, and obedience was order. That's what I believed, even as my reflection lagged in the mirror again, even as the bell swayed, though no one touched it. By the fourth night, Rachel avoided my eyes. She moved quickly, her face pale, lips pressed thin. When I tried to speak, she whispered, "Don't ask me. Don't." And she vanished into the dark corridors before I could answer. That night the parchment bore another phrase twisted from Scripture. I stopped. "This isn't right," I said, louder than I meant. Marco turned on me, his expression sharp. "Then make it right," he snapped. "Read." Vitale's hand lifted slightly, silencing further argument. "We are servants," he said. "The words are not ours to judge." His tone was iron. Mine broke. I read. The chamber pressed closer. The reliquary thudded once. The mirror cracked faintly at the edge. A hairline fracture. I told myself it was age, nothing more. But the sound it made was too much like bone. The fifth night weighed heavier. I felt it in my bones before the prayers began. The air was hot, then cold, shifting in waves. The candles hissed, though no wax dripped. The reliquary knocked twice against the stone as if answering some rhythm only it knew. My voice trembled as I read. I stumbled. Marco glared. "Hold steady," he hissed. Leone tapped the parchment, insisting I continue. Vitale's chant rose louder, drowning thought. The mirror groaned. It did not crack this time. It bent. The frame strained as if the glass wanted to breathe. My reflection opened its mouth before I did. I snapped my jaw shut, nearly biting my tongue. I told myself I imagined it. I had to. My sanity demanded it. Afterward, Rachel caught my arm. Her nails bit into my sleeve. "You must stop," she whispered. "They're not what they say they are." Her eyes darted toward Marco and Vitale. I shook my head, pulled free, muttered, "I can't." She stepped back, sorrow twisting her features. She crossed herself again and disappeared. That night in my quarters, I sat awake, clutching the rosary until blood welled in my palm. The bell still rang in my head, one strike repeating, endless. The mirror bent and whispered in memory. The parchment burned under my eyes. I told myself, tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow I'll refuse. But I didn't believe it. I asked to see the documents. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone. I just asked. Leone watched me for a moment, then nodded once and motioned me to follow. We left the black chapel by a side corridor and descended into a cooler room where the air smelled of paper glue and iron. Shelves ran in narrow aisles. He kept the lantern low. "You'll keep your hands to yourself," he said, not unkindly. "I'll turn the pages." He stopped at a table near the end of the aisle and set the lantern down. A flat box lay there, wrapped in linen and sealed with red wax. He broke the wax with a short knife and lifted the lid. Inside, under a layer of tissue, sat a thin plate of lead, dark and mottled, edges nicked as if filed by a nervous hand decades ago. He touched the corner with 2 fingers. "This is the plate," he said, "from the site near Kais, Gadara. The inscription's faint. You'll need the light." He angled the lantern. Lettering climbed the surface in cramped lines, crude but deliberate. Greek folded into Aramaic, then back again, as if 2 hands had fought for control of the text. I didn't need to read every letter to understand the hinge of it. The word lay there like a mouth. Legion. The flanking words weren't prayer, not as I'd ever used the word. They bound, they barred, they pinned. Leon lowered his voice. "This plate doesn't ask, it orders." He traced a line I didn't want him to touch. "It's a binding formula." The scribe stitched the name inside a net of negations. "You see the knots?" "I see them." My throat went dry. "And the note from the dig?" Leon pulled a separate folder from the box. He didn't hesitate. He moved like a man who'd performed this motion too many times. Inside the folder lay photographs of a chalked trench, a dust veil turning red in the lens. A hand held the plate with forceps. A scale card read, Sector 4, Locus 7. In the margin of a typed sheet, a fine hand had penned a warning. "Do not vocalize inscriptions. Dangerous." I felt heat rise in my face. "Then why am I reading them out loud at night?" He didn't answer right away. He set the plate down and covered it again. His shoulders dipped in a way that read as fatigue or guilt. Maybe both. "The copy you read isn't this," he said finally. "Someone decided the text would respond, if voiced." "Respond how?" He gave me a look that landed somewhere between pity and contempt. "You've heard the bell." My mouth opened, then closed. I wanted to say I hadn't noticed. I wanted to say, bells are bells, drafts are drafts, mirrors lag when the air's thick. I didn't say any of it. "Who changed it?" I asked. Leon's eyes slid toward the corridor. "You should speak with Father De Luca." I did, or rather, he spoke at me. Marco received me in a small office lined with stamped files. He waved me to a chair but didn't sit. "You're unsettled," he said. "I can see it." "The text is altered," I said. "The plate binds, the copy invites. You know that." He smiled without warmth. "Words are tools, Father Cole. You've spent a lifetime with them. Sometimes binding requires naming. Sometimes naming requires courage." "I won't read an invocation," I said, "not undrawn from a binding formula that warned, explicitly, against vocalization." You think the warning came from heaven? He asked, amused. Archaeologists scrawl, do not touch on everything. They fear breaking toys they don't understand. I stood. You asked me here in good faith. I came in good faith. I won't be made a mouth for something I don't consent to. That's the trouble, he said softly. You already have. He opened a drawer and laid a folder on the desk. He didn't push it toward me. He just let it sit like a snake that didn't need to move to be seen. You recognize prudence, he said, so you'll recognize the need for this. I didn't touch the folder. What is it? He lifted the cover with 2 fingers. Photographs, screenshots of email threads, a bank statement with my name, an image of me in the black chapel, angled from a height. In the photograph, my mouth is open, my hands raised as if in blessing. The caption printed below read, "Unauthorized rite led by visiting priest." My chest hollowed out. This is fabricated. Marco tilted his head. You're tired. People misremember. Context is malleable. And if the Chancery in Columbus receives an anonymized packet, if the Dispatch picks it up, if your parishioners on Maple Street wake to headlines, do you think they'll parse fine distinctions? I'll tell the bishop, I said. I'll tell him everything. And he'll ask Rome, Marco said. Rome will ask me. I'll send them copies of what you see here, with dates that match your travel, with entries that match bank transfers. No one will have time to verify before the story lands. Do you think the internet waits for due process? He smiled again, thin as a blade. You'll be placed on leave. Your flock will scatter. You'll stand alone. I sat back down without meaning to. The air was colder in that office than in the Scavi. I could feel the chill through my collar. Why? I asked. Why do this at all? Why pretend it's prayer? Marco leaned on the desk, both hands flat, knuckles pale. Because what we serve is older than your categories, he said. You think in binaries, petition and praise, blessing and ban. There's more. There's a science of names. We're not rebels, Father. We're loyal to the oldest order. That's not the church. It predates the church, he said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Your scriptures record an encounter on that shore for a reason. Power recognized power. It's not blasphemy to study the old mechanisms. It's stewardship. That plate bound a thing that called itself many, I said. You're not studying. You're feeding it. He didn't flinch. Everything living requires maintenance, he said. Even your sacraments presume repetition. You feed your God with praise every day. Why is it scandal when the economy runs the other direction? He let the words hang. We don't worship what the plate binds. We respect it. We leverage it. Leverage it for what? Order, he said. You think the world runs on sermons and sentiment. It runs on agreements, on balances. We keep certain weights in place so others don't fall. You're standing on a floor you didn't build. He tapped the folder with one finger. And you'll keep standing there, Father, if you're wise. I won't read from the altered text again. He shrugged. Then don't read. Stand with us. Let your presence sanction the act. That's all that's needed from you tonight. He slid the folder closed. But if you decide to leave, if you decide to speak, the packet releases on schedule. It's already queued. I left without the folder. The corridor outside blurred. I didn't realize I'd leaned against the wall until a guard nodded to me as he passed. I didn't return the nod. I felt hollowed out and strangely light, like a man who's been sick for days and only now understands the fever will not break. Rachel found me in the antechamber by the mirror. She didn't step close. They changed it, she said. Her voice was a thread. It's not a prayer. It's a feeding. I know, I said. It came out smaller than I meant. They'll break you, she said. That's the point. I won't let them. It sounded brave in my head. It sounded thin in the air. She glanced at the mirror. The glass was uncracked, but it swam faintly, as if a slow current moved behind it. Don't answer if it speaks, she said. Promise me. I can't promise what I don't control. Then promise to keep your mouth shut, she said. Promise to keep something for yourself. I'll try. She shook her head. They don't want your consent. They want your voice. I went back to the archive. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I could fix something by naming it correctly, by seeing it whole in the lantern light. Leon was there again, already waiting by the table. He'd resealed the linen around the plate, but he'd left the folder open. He didn't pretend not to know what I'd just heard. You shouldn't have shown me the warning, I said. You asked, he said. Friday came heavy. The Black Chapel smelled different that night, less of wax and stone, more of sulfur curling from invisible seams. The candles were already lit when I entered, their flames bending as if pushed by a breath that didn't belong. Marco stood waiting, his cassock too neat for the hour, his eyes too bright. Vitale prayed under his breath. Leon kept to the corner, lantern angled low. Rachel didn't look at me when I passed her. We formed the circle. The reliquary sat at the center, its lead surface dull, yet it seemed to exhale red. I told myself it was reflection, nothing more. The bell tolled. Not once, not twice, but half a strike and then another, broken, like a child counting without rhythm. Voices faltered, then the chant resumed. I tried to steady my breathing, but something was wrong with the sound. The cadence slipped, Marco's voice rushed, Vitale's slowed. Leon mouthed syllables that didn't match his parchment. The chamber filled with overlap, 100 echoes, though only 5 of us stood there. It sounded like a crowd pressed against the walls, speaking in a dozen dialects at once. My skin prickled. I gripped the page but didn't read. Continue, Marco hissed. I won't, I whispered, but the echoes surged louder, drowning me. The bell rang again, crooked, splitting the air. Every flame leaned sideways as though dragged by a tide. The mirror across the antechamber shuddered. I saw myself still reading even though my mouth was shut. My reflection's lips moved, syllables I didn't form pouring from its throat. I stepped back, but the reflection stepped forward, nose almost touching the glass. A crack split the surface from corner to corner. No sound of shattering, just a long, dry sigh like parchment tearing. Rachel gasped, her voice cut sharp through the noise. "Stop!" Marco snapped at her. "Hold your place!" His tone was command, not plea. The reliquary thudded once against stone. The knock reverberated in my teeth. Red light seeped from its seams, staining the floor. The air turned scorching, then freezing, each breath slicing as it entered my chest. I smelled sulfur, metal, old blood. The walls themselves wept condensation, drops sizzling on the floor as though acid fell. Vitale's chant broke into laughter. No, it wasn't laughter. It was a cry twisted halfway, joy and agony tangled. Leon's voice joined, low and cracked, and the chamber filled with a chorus that wasn't human. The walls shivered. From the corners came sounds like children sobbing, then cackling, then both at once. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the sound came from inside. I tried not to read. My lips burned with restraint. Marco leaned closer, parchment in hand. "Read," he barked. "You're the seal." "I'm not," I said. My throat hurt. "I won't." The bell tolled again. But not from the iron hung in the room. It tolled inside me. My ribs vibrated as if hollow metal rang there. I bent double, gasping. My tongue ached to form the words. I bit down until blood filled my mouth. The taste of iron steadied me. I spat on the floor. Marco raised the parchment higher. "Speak!" His shout broke against the stone. Rachel clutched her cross and cried out, "Leave him!" Her plea vanished into the cacophony. I broke Rule 4. I didn't read what was given. Instead, I forced out words older than my fear. Domine, libera nos. Lord, deliver us. The syllables tore my throat raw. The echoes shrieked in answer. Mirrors cracked deeper. Flames guttered sideways. The reliquary rattled, straining against its own seams. A smell of burning salt filled the chapel. Vitale screamed, a single command, "Hold him!" But no one touched me. Marco's face twisted, half fury, half awe. Leon turned his lantern away as if unwilling to watch. The walls bled sound. Crying became laughter. Laughter became screams until the line between them vanished. I staggered, every step dragging weight like chains. The reliquary glowed faint red, brighter, pulsing. A wind rose inside the sealed chamber, slamming us against each other. Candles snapped and fell. Darkness moved like a living thing across the floor. I prayed louder, words breaking, Latin spilling from memory. My voice cracked but held. Domine, exaudi vocem meam. Lord, hear my voice. The reflection in the mirror sneered, mouthing the opposite, a dark parody of every line. I shut my eyes to escape it, but the sound etched itself into me. I wanted to run. I wanted to fall silent, but silence felt like surrender. And surrender was death. The reliquary thudded again, harder, shaking dust from the ceiling. The floor trembled. Marco roared above the storm. "It answers! It lives!" His words cut through the chaos like a blade. I shouted back, but it wasn't to him. It was to the one I still believed in. The Latin burst from me, jagged, desperate. The echoes shrieked, recoiled. For a heartbeat, the chamber fell silent. Then the bell tolled once more, cleaner, sharper, but I didn't know if it was victory or warning. I dropped the parchment. My hands trembled, blood dripping from my bitten tongue. Rachel's eyes met mine across the circle. She mouthed without sound, "Don't stop." I didn't. I prayed louder, not from the page but from memory, each line a defiance. The chamber buckled, the mirror shattered, shards spraying outward, but every piece still reflected me reading when I'd fallen silent. They chanted back at me, dozens of fragments, dozens of mouths. The reliquary groaned. Red light poured like smoke, thick and choking. My lungs burned. Heat swelled, then cold cut through, skin blistering, then freezing in seconds. The cries in the walls swelled, children and elders, men and women, joy and terror, all fused into one voice. It pressed into my skull until vision blurred. I fell to my knees. Marco loomed over me, parchment flapping in the storm. "Finish it!" he shouted. His voice broke in the wind. "You've brought it this far. Finish!" I spat blood. No. The reliquary cracked at one edge. The sound was worse than glass, worse than bone. It was the sound of language splitting apart. Light tore from the seam, staining us red. Vitale sobbed with laughter. Leone turned away, lantern clutched tight. Rachel cried out, voice clear, "He won't. He refuses." She gripped her cross so hard the wood snapped. My last breath forced out words that weren't from parchment, weren't even fully remembered. Fragments of a psalm, fragments of faith. Though I walk, valley of shadow. The echoes screamed louder, but they pulled back, pressed to the walls like smoke against stone. The reliquary thudded one final time, then stilled. The light dimmed. The cold remained. The chamber reeked of sulfur and iron. My throat bled. My ears rang. The mirror lay in pieces, each shard still whispering with my voice. Marco dropped the parchment. His eyes burned. "You've ruined it," he said. His words were hatred, but beneath it, fear. I knelt, trembling, breath torn raw. I hadn't saved anything. I hadn't ended anything. I'd only delayed what pressed at the seams, and we all knew it. The silence that followed wasn't true silence. It was broken breathing, scraping sandals, the drip of wax. I could still hear fragments of weeping lodged in the walls, like the stone itself remembered. No one moved at first. Vitale pressed his hands over his eyes. Leon's lantern shook in his grip, casting jagged shadows. Marco's jaw worked as if chewing on rage. Rachel knelt near the broken cross in her hands, whispering prayers too soft to catch. My own chest felt hollow, as though part of me had been drawn out and not returned. Even stillness had weight here, and it pressed on us until none of us could stand without trembling. When I opened my eyes again, the reliquary was silent, its lead scarred and faintly warm. The chamber lay in ruins, wax spilled across the floor. Smoke twisted in the rafters, mirror shards spread like salt. But it didn't end. I knew it didn't end. It only paused. That's all my defiance bought. Vitale collapsed against the wall, eyes wet, mouth slack with something close to worship. Leone clutched his lantern and whispered to himself, words I couldn't catch. Marco's stare cut through me, his rage so thin it looked like calm. Rachel wept, clutching the broken cross as if it still held power. I wanted to tell her it didn't. I wanted to tell her nothing did. But I said nothing. My throat was torn raw, my tongue still bleeding. I left the Black Chapel without ceremony. No one stopped me. Maybe they couldn't. Maybe they wouldn't. I walked the corridors alone, and the air was too still, as though even the Vatican stones refused to witness what we'd done. Outside, the gardens lay dark. I heard no birds, no water, just the scrape of gravel under my shoes. The next day, Marco and Vitale were gone. Leone never appeared again. Rachel's quarters stood empty. No explanation, no dismissal, only absence. The archive attendants spoke little. One muttered that transfers were common. Another avoided my eyes altogether. But I knew. They'd scattered, or been scattered. The circle dissolved into silence. The reliquary remained, sealed again, but never safe. Nothing about it was safe. I told myself to go home. I told myself I was free to leave. Yet the folder followed me. It didn't matter that I never touched it. The packet arrived in Columbus, anonymous, on a Monday morning. I learned this weeks later when Bishop Cooper called me into his office. He held the printed copies, the forged screenshots, the accusation typed neat and cold. He didn't shout. He didn't condemn. He just looked at me too long and asked if there was anything I needed to say. I said no. My voice was hollow, unconvincing even to myself. I saw the weight settle in his expression. Trust cracked quietly. That was worse than fury. I returned to Ashland County, to the rectory on Maple Street. The church was the same, the pews the same, the bells the same. But the faces that turned toward me on Sunday didn't carry the same ease. They looked at me differently. Some curious, some cautious, a few suspicious. Mrs. Hayes still sat in her pew, rosary clutched tight, but her gaze lingered longer, questioning. Children whispered. I kept my homily short. I didn't trust my own mouth. Nights became heavier. I sat in the rectory, the desk lamp burning low, and wrote everything down, page after page. Not for vindication, not for proof, just to set it outside of me, because keeping it inside felt poisonous. I called it a confession, though no penance could match it. I thought maybe someone, someday, would read it and understand. Or maybe it would rot in a drawer until fire or mold ate it. Either way, I had to write. I dreamed of the mirror often. In the dreams it never shattered, it only bent, reflecting me in infinite lag. Each version of myself read from the parchment, mouths open, voices spilling in dozens of tones. I woke with the echo of those voices in my skull, unable to tell if I'd spoken in my sleep. Once, I bit my tongue so hard, blood streaked the pillow. I took it as a sign, better blood than voice. The reliquary didn't follow me physically, but the weight of it did. I imagined its thud under every quiet. The red glow haunted the edge of every candle I lit. I found myself flinching when the parish bell struck a single note, just one, too sharp, too alone. I froze each time, breath held, waiting for an answer that didn't come. It never came. But the silence afterward stretched like waiting. I couldn't explain any of this to them, not to the bishop, not to the parishioners, not even to Rachel if she still lived somewhere in hiding. Words felt thin, broken. I'd lost the trust of my flock. I'd lost the rhythm of my prayers. I'd lost the illusion that the church's walls kept the old things out. They don't. They never did. So I wrote. This account, this record, not for absolution, but survival. If the packet rots my reputation, let it rot. If silence saves no one, at least it keeps something unspoken. They wanted my voice. They'll never have it again. And still, on quiet nights, when the air's heavy and the world holds its breath, I still feel the weight of that silence, like something listening on the other side. I kept one tape recorder, old, heavy, batteries corroding at the edges. I spoke into it last night, my voice lower than I remembered, and ended the file with 7 words. The seal holds, for now. I don't know who I meant to hear it. Maybe no one. Maybe myself, when memory begins to rot. The sound of my own breath filled the silence afterward. It was louder than it should have been. The rectory is quiet. Too quiet. I sit at the desk, pages stacked around me, ink drying into lines that look less like testimony and more like scratches made by someone afraid of forgetting. Downstairs, the cellar holds a mirror I didn't place there. I found it against the far wall one morning, warped frame, glass dulled with age. I don't know who carried it in. I didn't ask. Sometimes I catch myself walking down the cellar steps at night, lantern in hand. The air grows colder with each step, though the furnace sits humming nearby. I stand in front of the mirror, stare until my eyes blur. It fogs on its own, though I'm not breathing on it. And when I move, my reflection follows a half-beat late, just a fraction, but enough. I close my eyes, count the seconds, then open them again. It never catches up, always a lag as though some part of me is still trapped on the other side. I don't speak. I won't. If it waits for my voice, it will wait forever. I've stopped ringing the church bell myself. Others can do it. I hear too much in the sound. One toll echoes longer than it should, thin and sharp, stretching into silence that feels alive. The parish hears nothing odd. They keep walking. They keep praying. I can't ask them if they notice. I can't risk them listening too closely. So I write. So I record. So I leave these fragments in drawers, in boxes, between pages of missals that no one opens anymore. I don't know if they'll find them. I don't know if I want them to. Warnings only matter if someone believes. And who would believe this? The reliquary isn't gone. I know that. Rome doesn't throw things away, it waits. The plate waits. Legion waits. Whether bound or fed, it waits. And I know enough now to understand that waiting is its own kind of hunger. If someone listens to this, remember only this much. Silence counts. Don't give your voice. Don't meet the reflection's eyes when it lags. Don't answer the bell. The seal holds for now, and the mirror in the cellar still breathes.